Blood still clung to the inside of my wrist where the IV line had been. The monitors beside my bed hummed softly, keeping rhythm with the breath of my newborn son pressed against my chest. I had barely met his eyes when the door slammed open. "Sign it," my mother-in-law hissed. The word cut through the sterile air sharper than the smell of disinfectant. A stack of papers fluttered onto my blanket, the black ink of my name already printed on the first page. Behind her stood Jessica, wearing my wedding ring, the diamond glinting under the fluorescent lights like it was laughing at me. Christopher didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, hands buried in his pockets, like a child who'd been caught stealing but didn't have the courage to return what he took. I remember thinking that my son would one day ask about this moment, his first hours in the world, and I would have to tell him that his father's silence was louder than any scream. Margaret's perfume filled the room before her cruelty did. "You trapped our son," she said, her lips curling as if she were tasting something spoiled. "You think we'll let you ruin his life? Sign the divorce and disappear." I tightened my grip on Leo. He whimpered, a fragile sound that somehow made her voice falter for half a second before she turned colder. Jessica's smirk returned that missing chill. "He gave me this ring last week," she said softly, flashing her hand like a trophy. "It's better for everyone if you just move on." I could have shouted, could have torn those papers apart and screamed that I built empires while they built lies, but I didn't. Instead, I breathed, slow and steady, letting silence spread like armor over my skin. When you've spent years learning how to hold power in a room full of men who underestimate you, you realize that anger is a luxury and silence, a weapon. Margaret reached for the papers, thrusting them closer. "You'll get $50,000, she said. "Take it and leave the baby. He belongs to our family, not yours." That was when my heart split, not from pain but from clarity. I had known cruelty before: business rivals, boardrooms that doubted me, partners who pretended, but nothing like this. Not the kind that looked you in the eyes while trying to steal your child. Christopher finally spoke. "Valentina, please," he murmured, voice trembling. "Let's not make this harder." The words landed heavier than any insult. I looked at him, the man I'd once believed in, the man who'd kissed me under fireworks and promised forever, and saw only a stranger wrapped in fear. He couldn't even meet my gaze. Jessica slipped her hand around his arm like she was claiming property. I almost laughed. Almost, because there, in the middle of that room, something inside me stopped breaking and started sharpening. The nurse pushed the curtain aside, startled by the noise, then froze when she saw me in a hospital gown, holding a newborn, surrounded by people dressed for a cocktail party. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Margaret smiled with poison grace. "Family business," she said. "We're leaving soon." But they weren't leaving soon enough. I could feel my pulse sinking with the steady beep of the monitor. Every sound in that room, the rustle of silk, the shuffle of guilt, the faint cry of my son, became a countdown. I wanted them gone, but more than that, I wanted them to remember this silence, the kind that comes before a storm. Jessica took a step closer, leaning in to whisper, "You really thought he'd stay with you? Look at you. You don't belong in our world." Her words were honeyed knives. I looked up at her. Really looked perfect makeup, perfect posture, perfect lie, and I felt an unexpected calm. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't belong in your world. I belong above it," I thought, but didn't say. "Not yet." Margaret mistook my calm for surrender. "Good," she said, satisfied. "Sign it." She placed a pen in my hand like she was granting mercy. My fingers trembled, but not from fear, from control. Every cell in my body wanted to shatter the illusion, to scream my name, my worth, my empire. But timing is everything. I laid the pen down and looked at them, one by one. William was by the door, already checking his watch, the patriarch who measured compassion and profit. Jessica's smile twitched. Christopher's jaw tightened. They thought they'd won. That was the moment I decided to let them, because the most dangerous person in the room is the one who stops fighting back, not because she's weak, but because she's done playing the wrong game. I kissed Leo's forehead, feeling his tiny heartbeat steady against mine. "You'll be safe," I whispered, though only he could hear. Then I looked up and spoke with a calm I hadn't felt in months. "Fine," I said, "but before I sign anything, I need to make a call." Margaret frowned. A call. To who? My assistant, I replied, reaching for my phone on the tray beside me. The motion was slow, deliberate. I just want to make sure my affairs are in order. Christopher shifted uneasily. Valentina, can we do this later? No, I said. Now. My thumb hovered over one contact. The same number that had built my fortune. The same voice that had handled every acquisition I'd ever made. When Carlos answered, his tone was professional as always. Yes, miss. Rodriguez? In that instant, the room went still. Even Leo's breathing seemed to pause. Carlos, I said, eyes fixed on the faces in front of me. Finalize the acquisition of the Williams Group. Drop the offer to $50 million. Take it or leave it. Effective immediately. The silence that followed was almost holy. Margaret blinked. William's hand fell from the doorknob. Jessica's smile died first, then Christopher's composure. What are you talking about? William demanded. I smiled faintly. The kind you give someone who's already lost but doesn't know it yet. You'll find out by morning, I said. I ended the call and set the phone down gently, like a gavel. None of them spoke. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. I pulled Leo closer, kissed his soft hair, and whispered, It's okay, baby. Mama's got you. Then I looked back at them, the people who had tried to strip me of everything, and realized they weren't giants. They were small, scared, and standing in the ruins of their own arrogance. They didn't know it yet, but everything they built had just begun to crumble. Outside, a distant thunder rolled across the sky. I smiled. Some storms don't need rain. They only need silence. By the time Carlos's voice faded from the tiny speaker and the room sank back into stunned silence, I could feel the years between who I used to be and who I had become pressing against my ribs. They were staring at me like I'd started speaking another language, like I was still the girl they thought waited tables at charity galas instead of funding them. It was almost funny, seeing the confusion on Margaret's face, the way William's brows knitted together as if he could calculate his way out of what he'd just heard. But their confusion wasn't my problem anymore. My problem had started a long time before that hospital room, on a night when I'd learned that being underestimated was both the greatest insult and the greatest shield a woman like me could ever have. 2 years earlier, the ballroom had felt like the center of the universe. Chandeliers hung low and heavy with crystal, lighting the room with a kind of golden forgiveness that made everyone look softer and kinder than they were. Strings played in the corner. Waiters glided with trays of champagne, and somewhere beyond the clink of glasses was the quiet knowledge that lives would actually be saved by the checks written that night. I stood near the back wall in a simple black dress, the kind you could wear to a funeral or a fundraiser, and watched my name disappear from the big screen. Anonymous donor, $5 million, the host announced. People turned their heads, murmuring, trying to guess. I took a sip of water and pretended to be interested in a floral arrangement so they wouldn't look my way. Power is easier to hold when no one knows you have it. That's what I'd learned in the years since my parents died. When they passed, I was 19 with more debt than memories. I remember sitting in the cramped living room of our apartment, the smell of stale coffee clinging to the curtains, staring at a stack of bills that didn't care I had just buried my mother. There was a laptop on the table. A cheap second-hand thing my father had bought for school, though neither of them lived long enough to see me use it to build a life. I taught myself to code from free tutorials and forums where no one knew my face, only my screen name. At 3 in the morning, when grief and exhaustion bent my spine, I would keep going because the alternative was giving up, and giving up didn't pay rent. My first program crashed more than it ran. My second was worse. By the 5th, I had a glitchy but functional app a mid-tier startup wanted badly enough to buy. They thought they were buying a team. It was just me in my pajamas, wiping tears off the keyboard. I sold, I saved, and I started over. By 25, I had a real office, even if it was just a windowless space in a building that smelled like old paper and nervous ambition. Tech Vista was nothing but a name and a dream then. A tiny company that no one took seriously until our software started quietly making other people rich. Men in suits twice my age would walk into conference rooms, shake hands with my male project manager, and talk around me like I was his assistant. I stopped correcting them. Being ignored meant they talked freely. Being overlooked meant they never saw me coming. By 28, I was a billionaire on paper. On paper, that was the problem. When I took meetings, they saw the net worth, not the woman. When they flirted, they wanted access to my board, not my heart. The one man I thought loved me had accidentally left his phone on my kitchen counter once, screen lighting up with messages to his friend about how he was going to lock this down and never have to worry about money again. I remember the way my hands shook as I read the thread, the way my reflection in the window behind the phone looked like a stranger. I ended things that night, calmly, quietly, and I promised myself I would never let anyone love my bank account more than my soul. So when I walked into that charity gala 2 years ago and a man in an ill-fitting tuxedo bumped into me so hard that champagne slid down my dress like liquid sarcasm, I didn't think it was the beginning of anything. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," he blurted, reaching for napkins. His cheeks flushed pink, his eyes sincere in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "I wasn't looking. Let me hear. Take this." He dabbed at the spill, then seemed to realize he was basically patting down a stranger's chest and froze. "I'm making this worse, aren't I?" I laughed before I could stop myself. It had been weeks since anything had been genuinely funny. "A little," I said, taking the napkins from him, "but I've had worse." "Please let me buy you dinner to make up for it," he said, stepping back but not away. "I swear I'm not usually this clumsy. I'm Christopher." He said his name like it mattered, like I was supposed to recognize it. But I didn't. I liked that. I liked that he didn't know mine either. Around us, the host announced the donation total. People clapped, the sound swelling like a wave, but his eyes stayed on my face. At that moment, I could have said, "I'm Valentina Rodriguez," and watched his expression change, watched the tiny flicker of recognition dawn if he realized who that made me. Instead, I said, "I'm Val. I'm a freelance graphic designer." The lie slid out smoothly. I had been practicing it for years. His shoulders relaxed. "Well, Val, the freelance graphic designer," he said, "let me at least get you a new dress, or dry cleaning, or, I don't know, a lifetime supply of napkins." I rolled my eyes. "Dinner is fine," I said. "If you're going to punish yourself, at least make it edible." He grinned, relieved. Later that night, I sat across from him at a small restaurant around the corner, one I actually liked instead of the kind people name drop. He asked questions about my work, about my favorite colors, about the cities I wanted to visit someday. He never asked who I knew at the gala or what I did to afford being there. When I told him I rented a modest apartment and drove an old car, he didn't flinch. "Some of the best stories start in small apartments and old cars," he said. "Maybe yours will too." If he'd said something slick or rehearsed, I would have shut down. But there was a softness in his voice that made me believe he meant it. It's dangerous when someone makes you feel seen in a way you've never allowed yourself to be. My assistant, Carlos, was the first to notice the shift. "You're smiling at your phone a lot," he commented one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly numbers in my office. The skyline glowed behind him, 1,000 windows reflecting a life I'd built out of stubbornness and code. "That concerns me. You hate people." "I don't hate people," I said. "I just don't trust their motives." "And this one?" he asked, nodding toward my phone. Christopher had just texted a photo of a crooked bookshelf he'd tried to assemble, with the caption, "I think gravity hates me personally." I bit back a smile. "This one makes good jokes," I said. "And he thinks I'm broke." Carlos raised an eyebrow. Dangerous combination. Sophia was less gentle. She sprawled on my couch in ripped jeans and a faded concert tee, swirling a glass of wine. "You're playing with fire," she said. "You think starting on a lie is going to somehow make the truth hurt less later?" "It's not a lie," I insisted, though we both knew it was. "It's editing," she snorted. "You're a billionaire, Val, not a PDF. You can't just black out the parts you don't like and hope no one notices." I looked down at my hands. "I just want to know, for once, that someone would choose me if I didn't have any of this." I gestured vaguely at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the office furniture, the life that looked like a magazine spread. "Is that so crazy?" Sophia's eyes softened. "No," she said quietly. "It's not crazy. It's just risky. But you've always liked the hard levels, so I guess I can't stop you now." The first time I met his parents, I understood exactly how hard this level would be. Their house looked like it had been built for the sole purpose of impressing people who already had everything. Marble floors, walls lined with oil paintings of people who probably owned sugar plantations at some point, and a dining table long enough to seat a minor monarchy. Margaret met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, looking me over like I was a dress she was thinking of returning, "Christopher tells us you're a graphic designer." The word designer stuck to her tongue like a piece of parsley. "How quaint." "Nice to meet you," I said, ignoring the sting. William barely looked up from his newspaper. He murmured, which I gathered was as close as he got to a greeting. There was another woman already seated at the table, tall and poised, with the kind of effortless beauty money breeds when it has nothing better to do. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my modest car, and when she stood, Margaret's voice warmed by at least 10 degrees. "Valentina, this is Jessica," she said. "She's practically family. We've known her parents for years." Jessica's handshake was firm, her smile even more so. "I've heard so much about you," she said. I doubted that. Throughout dinner, she laughed at all of Christopher's stories, touched his arm when she made a point, and praised William's business acumen like she was auditioning for a role. Every time I opened my mouth, Margaret managed to pivot the conversation away, changing the subject as if my thoughts were commercial breaks in the main program. When dessert arrived, Jessica leaned in and told a story about a weekend she and Christopher had spent at some lakeside house his family owned. She said it casually, like it was nothing, but her eyes flicked toward me to see the reaction. Christopher cleared his throat. "That was years ago," he said quickly, glancing at me. "We're just friends." Margaret smiled over her wine glass, the picture of maternal innocence. "Real friends are so hard to find," she mused, "especially in certain circles." She didn't have to say which circle she thought I didn't belong to. Later, as Christopher drove me back to my supposedly modest apartment, the one in the $45 million building I owned outright, he kept apologizing. "They're intense," he said, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "They'll come around once they get to know you." I watched the city lights blur past, thinking about how many men had said some version of that line to women like me. "Will they?" I asked softly. "Or will they just learn better ways to look down on me?" He glanced at me, wounded. "You know I don't care about any of that, right? The status, the money you think I don't have," I thought, but didn't say. Out loud, I just nodded. "I know," I said. "I believe you. I wanted to. God, I wanted to." Back in my penthouse later that night, I stood in front of the huge windows, looking down at the glittering grid of streets. It always amazed me how small everything looked from up there, cars like toys, people like ants, problems like whispers. But that night, the city felt heavier, more demanding. I pressed my palm against the glass and saw my reflection overlaid on the skyline. A woman in a simple dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry except the bracelet my mother had left me. "They don't know who you are," I told that reflection. "That's your advantage." At the time, I thought being underestimated would protect me from their worst. I didn't realize it would also invite it. When Christopher moved into my rented apartment, when we cooked pasta in a tiny kitchen that wasn't tiny at all, when he proposed with a simple ring and the words, "I don't care what my parents think, I choose you," I believed him. I said yes. I meant it. I had all the data, all the instincts, all the experience to know better, and I chose love anyway. That was my biggest risk. Not the companies I acquired or the markets I disrupted. Him. Us. He once told me, months after that charity gala, "You're the calmest person I know, Val. Like no matter what happens, you've already survived worse." I remember laughing and saying, "Maybe I have." I didn't tell him that calm is what happens when you've trained yourself to bleed without making a sound. Lying in that hospital bed years later, with our son on my chest and his family circling like vultures, I realized something else. They had never really seen me at all. To them, I was a poor girl from nowhere who had clung to their son like a lifeline. To Christopher, I was the woman he loved, but also the one he thought needed his protection. To the world, I was a headline they hadn't written yet. To myself, I was something entirely different. I was the woman they underestimated. And that, more than my money, more than my titles, was going to be the reason they lost. Because when you underestimate a woman who has already learned how to build herself from nothing, you don't just insult her. You give her the perfect cover to change everything while you're too busy looking down on her to notice. That night at the gala, when the screen flashed, "Anonymous, $5 million," I let my name disappear. In the hospital room, with my son in my arms and their divorce papers on my lap, I knew it was time to do the opposite. It was time to let my name be the storm. I didn't notice when the small lies started becoming my whole life. One moment I was a woman pretending to rent an apartment, and the next I was a wife pretending she belonged in her husband's family. The day the test turned positive, I had imagined everything differently. I thought Christopher would spin me around the kitchen, that we'd laugh, that his eyes would light up at the idea of a future that looked a little like both of us. Instead, when I told him, he smiled polite, hesitant, and said, "My mother will be thrilled." It wasn't what I needed to hear, but I told myself it was nerves. Hope is a stubborn thing. It survives on crumbs. Margaret arrived the next morning with an army of opinions. She replaced my vitamin brand, fired the housekeeper I'd had for years, and hired someone she trusted. She changed my doctor, redecorated the nursery in colors I hadn't chosen, and announced that the baby shower would be a family affair. Every decision I tried to make was met with that same cold smile. "You should rest, dear," she'd say. "You're not used to responsibility." I had run companies across continents, but apparently motherhood was beyond my pay grade. The invitations to family dinners came less often, then stopped altogether. I'd see photos online. Christopher, his parents, Jessica, yes, Jessica, all smiling around tables heavy with food. Sometimes I'd catch a caption like, "Family first." I'd stare at those words until they blurred, then close the app before the ache turned to something darker. At night, Christopher came home later and later, smelling of wine and her perfume. When I asked, he sighed. "We're working on a project. Stop being jealous, Val. It's not healthy for the baby." The irony of being gaslit in the name of health wasn't lost on me. I stopped asking questions. I started watching instead. Silence, I'd learned, collects evidence better than words ever could. I installed cameras in the hallways and saved every photo, every message, every dinner I wasn't invited to. Not out of vengeance, not yet, but out of self-preservation. When you live with people who rewrite reality, you need proof that you're not losing your mind. By the 5th month, Margaret had convinced Christopher to move us into the house next door to theirs. "It will be easier for the baby," she said sweetly. Easier for her, I thought. The first night there, I found her in my kitchen rearranging my cabinets. "I'm helping," she explained. "Your taste is minimal." Jessica began visiting almost daily, dropping by with excuses as flimsy as her designer scarves. "Just checking on you," she'd say, her eyes skimming over my swollen belly, her smile brittle. They'd sit in my living room, Margaret and Jessica, debating baby names like I wasn't even there. "Jessica Marie," Margaret said once, laughing. "Wouldn't that be perfect if it's a girl?" I excused myself before I said something unforgivable. The world outside kept moving, oblivious to the private war inside my walls. Emails piled up, contracts waited for my signature, but I couldn't focus. My empire could run without me, that was the point, but my heart couldn't. I walked through my days like a ghost in a life that didn't belong to me. The one place that still felt real was the small office upstairs where I kept a hidden laptop. It was connected to Tech Vista's secure network, the only link to the woman I used to be. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open the live feed of our stock chart just to remind myself that somewhere out there, I still mattered. Sophia called often. "Tell them," she begged. "Tell them who you are. End this." I always said no. Not yet. She didn't understand that the longer I stayed silent, the more clearly I could see them. You learn a lot about people when they think you're powerless. You learn what love isn't. At 7 months, Margaret decided my maternity clothes were too plain. She handed me a bag from a boutique Jessica modeled for. "You'll want to look presentable in family photos," she said. I stared at the white lace dress folded inside the same shade Jessica had worn to my wedding. "There won't be any family photos," I murmured. She smiled like she hadn't heard. The baby shower was the final insult. They planned it without me. When I arrived, every decoration screamed Jessica's taste. Pastel pinks, crystal vases, the kind of opulence that tried too hard. My name was missing from the banner above the cake. It read, "Welcome Baby Williams," not "Welcome Baby Rodriguez," just theirs. Jessica stood by the table in a flowing dress, thanking guests for coming as if she were the mother-to-be. When someone asked who the godmother would be, Margaret announced, "Jessica, of course. She's practically family." I smiled because the alternative was crying. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. When the speeches began, Margaret raised her glass. "To Jessica," she said. "She'll be more of a mother to this child than some people ever could." Laughter. Applause. My vision blurred. I excused myself, locked myself in the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub until the sobs came in silence, the kind that shake but never sound. When I looked up, the mirror showed someone I barely recognized, pale, tired, too small for the storm she was carrying. "They think you're weak," I whispered. "Let them." Sophia found me later, her voice soft but firm. "Please, Val. Enough. Show them. Show them everything." I shook my head. "I need to see how far they'll go." Her eyes filled with pity. "And when they reach the end?" "Then," I said, "so will I." 2 weeks later, I overheard Margaret in the kitchen, her voice low but clear. "Once the baby's born, we'll handle custody. My lawyer says it's simple if she's unstable." My stomach turned to ice. I stood in the hallway, hand on the door frame, heart pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it. Unstable. That was the word she'd used to erase me. I backed away quietly, every step a vow. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn Christopher. I just started preparing. From that night on, I documented everything. I installed hidden cameras in the living room, microphones under the dining table, even a small device in Christopher's car. What I recorded would later become my armor. Margaret's sneering remarks, Jessica's whispered promises, Christopher's complicity, every insult, every cruel plan preserved in digital clarity. Labor came early 2 weeks before the due date. I woke at 2 a.m., the pain sharp and certain. I reached for the empty space beside me. No Christopher. I called once, twice, 5 times. No answer. Then I called Margaret. "Take a taxi," she said, annoyed. "We're busy." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity had gone beyond tears. Sophia arrived 20 minutes later, barefoot and terrified, driving like she could outrun betrayal itself. The contractions blurred time. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and cold hope. I remember gripping Sophia's hand, screaming once, then again, until the world narrowed to a single heartbeat. 12 hours later, Leo arrived small, perfect, loud. I held him against my chest, his skin warm and new, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Christopher appeared 2 hours after that, smelling like perfume and guilt. He kissed my forehead awkwardly, checked his phone, and muttered something about business. I didn't ask whose business it was. The nurse asked if he wanted to hold the baby. "In a minute," he said, walking out. He never came back that night. When morning light spilled across the room, I knew it was over. Not the marriage that had ended long before, but the illusion. Everything they'd built on my silence was about to collapse under the weight of their own cruelty. I looked at Leo sleeping, his tiny fist curled near his mouth, and felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't afraid anymore. 9 months of humiliation had taught me one truth. Some people mistake kindness for weakness until kindness is the only thing they can no longer afford. I kissed my son's forehead and whispered, "They wanted control. They're about to learn what real control looks like." Outside, the morning shift nurses traded gossip about the storm rolling in that evening. I smiled faintly. They didn't know another kind of storm was already forming, the quiet kind that starts with a single phone call. The morning after Leo was born, the hospital felt like a stage after the play had ended. The applause had died, the lights still burned too bright, and all that was left was the echo of what people had said when they thought no one was listening. I sat propped against the pillows, my newborn sleeping on my chest, his tiny breath syncing with my heartbeat. The world should have been quiet, gentle, forgiving. Instead, it was holding its breath. The divorce papers still lay on the table beside my bed, untouched but not unseen. They had become a presence in the room, a dark object waiting for surrender. I looked at them and thought of everything they represented: betrayal, cowardice, arrogance, and felt nothing but clarity. When the door opened, I already knew who it was. I could tell by the perfume before the voice. Margaret entered first, composed like she'd practiced her cruelty in front of a mirror. William followed, his face red, eyes tired from the weight of his own ego. Jessica came next, dressed like she was walking into a magazine shoot instead of a hospital room, my wedding ring glinting on her finger as if mocking me. And behind them, Christopher lingered in the doorway, looking like a man who'd lost something he didn't know how to name. Margaret spoke first. "It's time," she said coldly. "You've had a night to rest. Let's end this." William stepped forward, dropping the envelope on the bed beside Leo's blanket. $50,000, he said flatly. "That's more than fair." Jessica's lips curved into a smirk. "You should take it. Start over somewhere far away. You're not part of this family anymore." My fingers brushed the edge of the papers, but I didn't open them. "And my son?" I asked quietly. Margaret's eyes gleamed. "He stays with us. He's a Williams, not a Rodriguez. We'll raise him properly." The words sliced through me, but I didn't let them see it. I had been broken once before in my life when my parents died. When I was 19, when the world expected me to fall apart. I didn't then, and I wouldn't now. Christopher shifted uncomfortably, his voice barely above a whisper. "Valentina, please, don't make this harder." I turned my head and looked at him, really looked. The man I married was gone. What stood there was a stranger wrapped in fear and convenience. "You already made it hard," I said softly. "I'm just making it clear." Jessica crossed her arms. "You're being dramatic. Sign the papers and go. You'll be free." I almost laughed. Freedom wasn't something they could give me. Freedom was what I'd built in silence, in boardrooms and sleepless nights, while people like them believed I was small. I looked at Leo. His tiny hand curled into a fist as if even he refused to let go. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I need to make a call." Margaret's brows furrowed. "A call? To who?" "To the person who handles my affairs," I replied, reaching for the phone on the tray beside me. Christopher's voice trembled. "Val, please, we can settle this later." I pressed the power button, watching the screen light up. "No," I said. "Now." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the machines. When the line connected, Carlos's voice came through, steady and familiar. "Yes, Miss Rodriguez?" The name hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Margaret blinked. Jessica frowned. William looked confused. I met their eyes and said calmly, "Carlos, it's me. Finalize the acquisition of the Williams Group. Drop the offer to $50 million. Effective immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood," he said. "I'll inform their board and the press team." "Thank you," I replied and ended the call. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then William exploded. "What the hell did you just say?" I smiled faintly. "You heard me. I own Tech Vista Corporation, the company that's been negotiating to buy your sinking ship of a business for months. Congratulations, William. You just sold it for 85% less than market value." Margaret's face lost all color. Jessica's mouth fell open. Christopher took a step back as if the air had been punched out of him. "That's not possible," Margaret stammered. "You're a designer." "I was never a designer," I said. "I was the anonymous donor who gave $5 million to the hospital where you first met me. I was the one you called a gold digger while spending my money. The building you think I rent? I own it. The car you mocked? It's parked next to 3 others in my garage." Jessica shook her head, voice breaking. "You're lying." "Am I?" I asked, unlocking my phone again and scrolling to a video. I turned the screen toward them security footage of Jessica sneaking into my bedroom weeks ago, trying on my jewelry, taking photos for social media. Her face drained of blood. "I have months of recordings," I said calmly. "Conversations, visits, everything, including the one where you and Margaret discussed taking my child. Should I play that one too?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that no longer existed. Christopher finally found his voice. "Valentina, please, don't do this. We can fix it." I met his eyes. "There's nothing to fix. You already broke it. Remember the prenup you didn't bother reading because you were so in love? It has an infidelity clause. You get nothing." His lips parted. "You spied on me?" "No," I said. I protected myself. From you. William's voice rose. You can't just take our company. I can, I said, and I did. I pressed the call button, and two of my private security staff appeared at the door, tall and silent in dark suits. Please escort these people out of my room. They're trespassing. Margaret's shock turned to pleading. Valentina, wait, we can work this out. We're family. My name is Miss Rodriguez, I corrected. And family doesn't throw divorce papers at a woman hours after she gives birth. She tried to step closer to the bassinet, but one of the guards moved between us. Touch my child, I said evenly, and I'll have you arrested for assault. Jessica was crying now, hands trembling. Please, I didn't know. You knew enough to wear my ring, I said. Take it off. She hesitated. My guard took a step forward, and she yanked it off, dropping it onto the floor. It landed with a sound sharper than glass breaking. William muttered something about lawsuits, but even he didn't believe it. They were finished, and they knew it. Get out, I said quietly. It wasn't a shout, just a statement of fact, and somehow that made it worse. The guards guided them toward the door. Margaret turned once more, eyes wild. You'll regret this, she hissed. No, I said softly. You will. When the door shut behind them, the silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. I reached for Leo, lifting him into my arms, his warmth against my skin the only proof that something good had survived the wreckage. I looked down at him and whispered, It's over, baby. Mama's got you now. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and cleansing, streaking down the window like a curtain drawing on the final act. The phone buzzed once more, a message from Carlos. Acquisition complete. I smiled, pressing my lips to my son's forehead. They thought they could bury me, I murmured. But I was the ground. The thunder rolled again, distant and low, as if the world itself was bowing to the quiet that follows justice. And in that silence, I finally exhaled. By the time the sun set that evening, the world outside my hospital window had no idea that a family had just imploded behind one white door. Nurses passed by smiling. Patients laughed softly in recovery rooms. Life went on, and somewhere between those ordinary sounds, 3 people who once believed they owned me were watching their lives collapse in real time. The news broke before midnight. Tech Vista Corporation, my company, had finalized the acquisition of the Williams Group at a fraction of its worth. The press release went out automatically. I had written it weeks ago, ready to be triggered by a single call. The headlines multiplied like wildfire. Tech CEO Valentina Rodriguez expands empire. Anonymous donor revealed as billionaire visionary. Family-owned firm sold overnight amid scandal. The city woke up whispering my name. For years I had lived behind walls of anonymity, building, protecting, waiting. Now the world saw me. But the truth was, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt still. The kind of stillness that comes when there's nothing left to prove. Carlos came to the hospital the next morning, impeccable as always, suit pressed, eyes tired but proud. He placed a folder on my bedside table. Everything's complete, he said quietly. Their board accepted the offer at dawn. Bankruptcy would have hit them by noon. I nodded, running my fingers along the folder's edge. And the family? He hesitated. They're dealing with it. I didn't need details. I could imagine Margaret pacing her marble kitchen, shouting into phones that no longer rang. I could see William staring at the blank screens of accounts frozen and emptied by debt collectors. I could see Jessica's face when her agency called to terminate her contract for moral clause violations. None of it brought joy. It just restored balance. 3 days later, I left the hospital with Leo swaddled in a soft gray blanket. The world outside was drenched in light rain, soft and clean, washing away what was left of the storm. The security team followed quietly behind as I stepped into the car. Reporters had gathered at the entrance, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. Miss Rodriguez, is it true you were living under an alias? Did your husband know who you were? What will happen to the Williams family? I didn't answer any of them. I just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that ends conversations before they start. The car door shut, sealing me inside a pocket of calm. Leo stirred, tiny fingers curling around mine. Don't look back, I whispered, and I didn't. The following week unfolded like the final act of a play I'd already memorized. Every news outlet wanted the same angle: the billionaire wife who hid her identity, the betrayal, the comeback. My PR team filtered what they could, but the story was unstoppable. For once, the public was on my side. I hadn't expected sympathy. I had expected spectacle. Instead, the comments poured in. She's a hero. She took everything they tried to take from her. That's how you rise. I didn't need the applause, but I understood its purpose. People needed to believe that justice still existed somewhere, even if it wore a silk blouse and whispered instead of shouting. Margaret tried to contact me through lawyers. I declined every request. William sent a letter, handwritten, asking for a meeting, calling it a misunderstanding. I returned it, unopened. Jessica posted a video online, crying, saying she'd been manipulated, that she was just following her heart. The internet didn't believe her. Within days, her sponsors vanished, her modeling career dissolved, and one cruel headline summed it up: from runway to runaway. Christopher didn't appear at all, not in the news, not in person, until one afternoon, 3 months later, when I left my office and saw him standing near the building's exit. He looked smaller than I remembered. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by jeans that didn't fit and a jacket too thin for the season. His hair was messy, his eyes bloodshot. Security moved toward him immediately, but I lifted a hand. "It's all right," I said. He stepped forward, voice trembling. "Valentina, please, just 1 minute." I stopped a few feet away, holding Leo's stroller handle tightly. "You have one." He swallowed hard. "I made a mistake. I was weak. It was my mother's idea." "No," I interrupted. "It was yours. You let them do it because it was easier than standing up for what was right." His face crumpled. "I love you," he said. "I always have." "Love?" I repeated, almost gently. "You loved the version of me that needed saving, not the one that could save herself." He took a step closer, desperate. "He's my son. I have rights." "You signed them away," I said. "Remember? You agreed to everything for $50,000. I paused. "Didn't even get the check, did you?" He flinched, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Around us, the city buzzed taxis, sirens, life moving on, and for the first time, I realized how far I'd climbed from the woman he'd tried to bury. "Christopher," I said quietly, "you had a queen, and you treated her like a beggar. You had a family, and you chose a performance. You had everything, and you traded it for nothing." His eyes filled with tears. "Please," he whispered, "just tell me what to do." "You start over," I said. "Without me." I turned the stroller toward the car, and before stepping in, I looked back once. He had sunk to his knees on the sidewalk, hands over his face, shaking. Cameras flashed from across the street. I didn't stay to watch. The door closed, and the city swallowed the sound. Weeks passed, and the story took on a life of its own. The same people who had once whispered that I was a gold digger now called me a symbol of resilience. Magazines wanted photo spreads. Networks wanted interviews. I agreed to one not for fame, but for something greater. On live television, I spoke about silence, about how women are taught that endurance is a form of weakness when it's actually a form of wisdom. I spoke about dignity, about building strength not from revenge but from rebuilding. They thought I was powerless, I said, looking straight into the camera. They forgot that power doesn't always raise its voice. After that, the noise quieted. The world found new scandals, new stories, but mine lingered just long enough to become a kind of legend. Margaret and William sold their mansion to cover debts. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Jessica was last seen working at a boutique downtown, avoiding the eyes of customers who recognized her. Christopher disappeared into the gray background of failure. None of it made me proud, but it made me peaceful. At home, life found a new rhythm. Leo's laughter filled the penthouse, soft and bright, echoing against glass walls that once only reflected loneliness. Sophia moved in for a while to help me adjust, though we both knew she was there to make sure I didn't drown in the quiet. "You really did it," she said one night, watching Leo sleep. "You took everything they used against you and turned it into armor." I smiled faintly. "I didn't do it to win," I said. "I did it to end it." Ugh. When she asked me if I'd ever forgive them, I thought for a long time before answering. Forgiveness isn't for them, I said. It's for me, and I already forgave them the moment I stopped needing them to understand. She nodded, eyes glistening. That's colder than revenge. I looked out the window, at the city pulsing below. No, I said softly. It's warmer. Revenge burns everything. Peace rebuilds. By the time Leo turned 6 months old, the world had mostly moved on. But every so often, when my name appeared in a headline, I would still receive letters, women who wrote to say they had found courage through my story, that they had left marriages that suffocated them, jobs that belittled them, lives that ignored them. That was the real consequence, the one no one saw coming. My silence had become an echo that reached places power never could. Late one night, after putting Leo to sleep, I stood by the window holding a glass of wine and watched lightning flicker across the distant skyline. It wasn't violent, just steady, beautiful. The city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. I thought about all that had happened, all that I'd lost and found again, and whispered, "Revenge isn't the story. Survival is." Leo stirred in his crib, and I smiled. Tomorrow, I would take him to the park, maybe buy ice cream, maybe just sit under the open sky and breathe. The world would keep spinning, with or without me. But tonight, it was still, and for the first time, that stillness didn't feel empty. It felt earned. By the time Leo turned 1, the world had almost stopped asking how I had survived and started asking what I would do next. It's funny how quickly people move on from the earthquake and start documenting the flowers that grow through the cracks. The Williams family, once the center of their own universe, had become a cautionary tale in business columns and whispered conversations at charity galas. The family that underestimated the wrong woman. But for me, the real story wasn't what they lost. It was what I chose to do with what I had gained, not the money, not the headlines, but the clarity. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about watching them fall. It was about refusing to let their fall define the rest of my life. The night of the gala, the hotel ballroom glowed with layered light, the soft golden warmth of chandeliers, the sharp white flash of cameras, the steady blue of stage lamps waiting for a speech. Waiters moved through the crowd with practiced grace, carrying trays of champagne and tiny, perfectly arranged bites of food no one would remember. I stood backstage for a moment, shifting Leo on my hip, pressing my cheek to his hair as he blinked curiously at the world he didn't yet understand. He clutched the edge of my dress in one small hand, the other wrapped around the ear of a stuffed lion that had already lost half its fur from being loved too much. "You ready, baby?" I whispered. "Tonight is your bedtime story and their wake-up call." Somewhere out in the ballroom, a host introduced me with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty and revolutionaries. They listed my titles: CEO, philanthropist, founder, and then, almost as an afterthought, survivor. I didn't flinch at that word anymore. Survival, I had learned, was not a shameful chapter you hide. It was the spine that kept the whole story standing. The curtains parted, and I stepped onto the stage. The room fell quiet in that way large crowds do when they're all thinking, "I've waited to see this in person." They saw the red dress first, a deep, bold red that matched nothing in my past except the color of the bruises life had tried to leave on my spirit. They saw the heels, the diamonds, the calm. What mattered most, though, was who I was carrying. Leo looked out at the sea of faces, blinked once, and then tucked his face into my shoulder, satisfied that as long as I was there, nothing could go wrong. I walked to the podium and set him gently into a small seat beside me, where he could see me and the lights and absolutely none of the shadows behind our story. "Good evening," I began, my voice echoing softly through the room. "Tonight we're here for them." I gestured toward the giant screen behind me, where photos of women and children appeared blurred to protect their identities, but clear enough to tell a truth. Shelters, hospital rooms, small apartments with too many suitcases and not enough safety. Women who were told they were nothing. Women who were told they were crazy, too emotional, too weak, too dependent. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some looked down at their drinks. Some stared at me, unblinking. "You know my story," I continued. "Or at least, you know the version with the most dramatic headlines. Billionaire wife, secret identity, betrayal, revenge. It's a good story. It makes for good television. But that's not the part I want you to remember. Somewhere, cameras zoomed in, hungry for the moment I might talk about the people who wronged me. I didn't give them names. I gave them something else. I want you to remember, I said, what it feels like to hold your newborn in your arms while people you trusted try to take everything from you. I want you to remember that some of the most dangerous violence in the world never leaves a bruise. It lives in words, in papers, in signatures, in silence. I let that word hang there, silence. It had used to be my prison. Now it was my platform. They thought my silence meant weakness, I said. They didn't know silence can be strategy. They thought I was alone. They didn't know I was documenting everything. They thought they were taking my future. They didn't know they were writing their own ending. The crowd shifted, listening more intently. I could see faces I recognized: investors, celebrities, journalists, and ones I didn't. People whose tickets had been paid for by the very foundation we were raising money for tonight. But I didn't come here to talk about them, I said. I came here to talk about what comes after, because the best revenge is not watching someone else fall. It's choosing to rise so high that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. I told them about the foundation I had created, for women who were told they weren't enough, how we paid for legal teams to fight for custody, how we provided safe housing for women and children escaping violence behind closed doors, how we offered job training, therapy, and, perhaps most importantly, a community that believed them. Revenge is a fire, I said. It burns hot, and it burns out. But purpose? Purpose is a slow, steady flame. It warms. It lights the way. Leo dropped his lion toy, and it thumped against the podium. A soft chuckle rippled through the audience. I smiled, picking it up and handing it back to him. This, I added, glancing at my son, is the only legacy I care about now. Not the companies, not the headlines. A child who will grow up knowing that love never asks you to become smaller. That family never comes with conditions printed in fine legal language. Later, after the speech, the numbers came in $12 million raised in one night. Enough to expand shelters, fund countless legal battles, give thousands of women more than just survival, a second chance. People approached me with handshakes, tears, promises to help. Somewhere in the background, the cameras caught every angle, ready to spin the night into clips and quotes and shareable inspiration. But the moment that stayed with me happened when the gala had already begun to wind down, when most of the guests had left and staff were clearing tables. I was standing near the edge of the stage, watching workers fold linens, when a woman approached me. She was maybe in her 40s, dressed simply, with tired eyes and a nervous grip on her small clutch. "Miss Rodriguez?" she asked quietly. "Just Valentina is fine," I replied. She hesitated, then took a breath. I saw your interview a few months ago," she said. "I was in a shelter then. My husband had told me I was nothing without him, that no one would believe me if I left." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I believed him, until I saw you talk about silence, until I watched you say that sometimes the kindest women are the ones people should be most afraid of overlooking." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I left the next day," she whispered. "The shelter helped me find a job. I have my own place now. My kids sleep without fear. I just wanted to say, thank you, for making me feel like I wasn't crazy, like I wasn't alone." My throat tightened. This, more than any acquisition, any headline, any gala, was the real victory. I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "You did that," I said. "You left. You chose yourself. I just told my story. You wrote your own." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes you need to see someone else walk through the fire first to believe you can, too." After she left, I stood alone for a moment under the dimmed lights, Leo asleep against my shoulder. I looked up at the ceiling, at the glittering chandelier that had seemed so distant when I was that 19-year-old girl staring at unpaid bills, and I whispered, "We made it. Not because I was rich, not because they were ruined, but because the pain they tried to bury me with had become something I could plant and grow." Later that night, after I tucked Leo into his crib and washed off the last traces of makeup and spotlight, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea and opened my laptop. The notification counter on my channel had exploded: messages, comments, People sharing how the story had made them feel strong, less alone, more seen. I read a few, smiling, then hit the record button. The camera light turned red, and I spoke directly to the people on the other side of the screen. If you're watching this, I said softly, and you've ever been made to feel small, let me tell you something no one told me when I needed to hear it most. Your worth is not up for debate. It doesn't rise and fall with someone else's ability to recognize it. It doesn't disappear because someone walked away, or threw papers at you, or tried to rewrite your story without your consent. I paused, letting the words settle between us. Sometimes the best revenge, I continued, isn't a dramatic showdown or a public victory. It's waking up every day and choosing to build a life so full of peace, purpose, and self-respect that the people who tried to break you become a footnote in a chapter they never deserved to headline. I leaned a little closer to the camera. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength, do one thing for yourself right now. Claim it, type it, say it out loud. I am enough. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of women and men who refuse to let cruelty write their ending, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Not for me, for you. So you have a reminder, every week, that you are not alone, that dignity still wins, and that silence, when used wisely, is not surrender, it's strategy. I smiled, the kind of quiet, steady smile that only comes after you've walked through the fire and found you still have a voice. I'm Valentina, I said softly. Thank you for listening. And remember, the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and then being so happy that their opinions don't matter anymore. I'll see you in the next story. Then I hit stop, closed the laptop, and turned off the lights. The city outside glowed, distant and bright, but for once, I didn't need its reflection to know who I was. I picked up my sleeping son and carried him to bed, knowing that whatever came next, I had already won, not against them, but for myself.